Well, welcome to Convos on the Couch. Today I'm privileged enough to have Tom Court on the couch. Great timing with the British Lions over here running around. Tom, unbelievable story, and we'll delve into that a little bit, and he can put his flavour on it. But started his rugby career late, 23 I think you started the career. Was a Australian rep in shot put, pretty quick on foot too, which I hear for a shot putter. And then quickly accelerated from, I think it was the UQ 5th grade, if I've got it right, through to playing for the Reds very quickly, and then playing professionally in Australia, moving overseas to pursue rugby career over there off the back of your Irish heritage, which I've got the same. I think it was 12 years ago when the Lions were here, and my Irish cousins all followed over the tour, which was very exciting for them to come to Australia for the first time. And then obviously went on to play sort of 32 caps for Ireland, and toured with the team over here with the British Lions, which was pretty special. And Rugby World Cup in 11. Mate, thanks for joining me on the couch, and do you want to put any flavour on that?
No, look, thanks for being here. I think, I still find it a bit surreal sometimes thinking through everything that we fit into sort of 12 years of rugby, I guess, or probably 13, 14 from when I first started. But it's nice to look back on it now and think about it all, and actually probably enjoy it a bit more now, because when you're in the middle of it, you're just worried about games and playing and training and all the business side of things, really. So
yeah, great. Nearly 300 games, which is phenomenal. Now, you've studied sort of counselling, psychology, speech therapy, health science, entrepreneurship and innovation, current focus at UQ on urban design, sustainability, and you know how that's taking place. It's an interesting role, and where you've got into from a rugby career. How did you weave your way down that track?
Well, I mean, the plan was, well, I guess it depends how far you want to go back. Originally, I wanted to study medicine straight out of high school, and then realised I didn't really like regurgitating anatomy, physiology, so steered into psychology. Always been very interested by people, you know, behaviour, mannerisms, all that sort of things. Just people are very interesting. So that was sort of where the psychology came from. So the plan was to actually do organisational psych to start with, where I started that postgrad degree at UQ, and then rugby took off. So the university side got put on hold, and then towards the end of my time in London, right at the end of my career, we did a research master's on performance psych. So it was sort of trying to blend that organisational and performance psych. Coming back to Australia, the plan was to be working as a provisional psych and get straight back into it. I was one of those people that thought I was really well prepared for the transition out of rugby, and it didn't quite happen that way. Mapping qualifications from UK to Australia took a bit of time. And realistically, the move back to UQ for work was just out of necessity, really, for having to find a job and get a mortgage. It sounds very boring and practical, but like, I had been offered a provisional psych role, but then wasn't able to take it because of the mapping took so long. So I was then offered another role, provisional psych role, the following January, and just couldn't wait that long. I'd been working as a performance consultant for a heap of elite sports teams, you know, performance preparation with athletes and good habits, and just that whole bigger picture because of the sort of athletics background and individual sport, and then the rugby background, which is a team sport. But banks don't like patchy consultancy work. So the bank pretty much just said, any old job, continuous role, 2 paychecks, you're good for a mortgage. And that's where I just started looking at UQ. So I was very, very fortunate that a role came up at UQ. I was looking for research officer roles, and there was a role that originally came up in the graduate school to get started. And then I moved around a little bit, ended up in a role that was based on research impact, translation, commercialisation to a degree. So what are the genuine, you know, tangible benefits from research? You know, the vaccines that are saving lives, you know, the medical technology devices or things like that that are saving people millions in money, all that sort of thing. So that was my role for a number of years. And then the role with strategic partnerships came up about a year ago now, where the transition was going to be into the space probably originally around the Games 2032, just because of my sports background and because I knew where everybody was at the university. And then as we sort of got into that space, we realised that the games went from being sort of a vertical to a horizontal. Everything in southeast Queensland and Queensland in general is linked to the games. So how can we refine it a bit? And that's where the built environment, infrastructure, transport, tourism space was probably a bit more productive and a bit more defined, I guess. And that's been it. It's, I really enjoy it. I love my job, so.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time, 7 years or so to the big kick-off in southeast Queensland. As you said, it's now stretching out to larger area. How are they going to, I suppose, balance that, dealing with different governments, different jurisdictions, the development side, having to be able to land on that? How are they going to get the balance right for all of that with such a short period of time to deliver?
I think it'll be interesting because obviously initially there was obviously the big hold up because of the election. We got through the state election. I think obviously the local governments and local councils are on board. The state government's very on board. I think we've just heard recently that there's been an agreement on funding and everything for the infrastructure for the games now with the federal government as well. So I think realistically, because of the short timeline, because we are now under the pump to get everything done, to get everything built, to get everything planned and organised before the games, I think all the the local, state and federal governments are all realising we have to get it all together now or it's not going to happen. Yep. So we want to deliver something that is exciting, that attracts, puts Brisbane on the world stage and creates a legacy for Brisbane. So I think that point now is where everyone's going, all right, we've got to work together and get this done. And that's pretty much it. So that shortened timeline is actually benefiting everybody getting on the same page.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. I just saw over at Everton, over in the UK, Lang O'Rourke's just finished doing a pretty much a modular build of a stadium that's holding sort of similar size to Suncorp. I think it's about 54,000, but all concrete, all steel, was all built off-site, then brought in, and then obviously they had 10 cranes or whatever they had running around, putting it all together as a module, and it looks unbelievable. You couldn't tell the difference between it and the likes of a Suncorp stadium. But yeah, there's going to have to be a bit of technology, a bit of innovation to get their head around in that time frame, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that modular prefab trend coming in a lot more through the whole industry. It's a very strong influence now, rather than the old school, we'll just be on site and build it on site. With the new technology and with obviously now with a lot of the AI modelling that can really, take everything to the next level from planning and design, you're seeing that modular prefab off-site, bring it in, pop it up. I mean, even to some of the smaller infrastructure, it's that speed of disassembly. The big thing is, though, is remembering that we've only got probably just around 18 months before they have to start building. So there's not a lot of time for any new research.
Yeah.
So obviously from a university perspective as well, it will be looking at what's out there, what sort of research and innovation is out there already. How can we utilise that to the best of the ability in that time frame to get it all in? And I think there'll be a real emphasis as well, looking at the legacy side, at the circular economy, repurposing side at the back end. I think that's a real opportunity for especially the construction industry and material innovation sort of space, in that rather than worrying so much around how do we manufacture everything, perfectly, get it done, get a result, keep everyone happy with the games, and then really focus that innovation side on how can we then repurpose it to have, that second life after the games.
Yeah, and I mean, legacy is a great word. What realistically, what's going to happen to make sure that, those regional areas like, Townsville, Cairns, Rockhampton, serves the people living there sort of long after they've packed up the medals and taken them home?
Look, I think it's interesting because obviously the plan that's been rolled out, there's genuine, like they've targeted the regional areas and purposely want things to happen all the way up the coast and all around Queensland. So they just need a deliberate place-based strategy, I guess, with all those locations. I know obviously there was debate around Rocky for the rowing and some of these things, but as long as there is a plan that how are we going to use this after the game, so there's some sort of activation strategy afterwards so that, one, it can be built and used effectively for the games and big things, connectivity and transport, and then secondly, how are they going to use it after the game? So how are they going to use these facilities, even the precincts and everything for the games, to really promote that sort of I guess, legacy aspect of use and activation after the game, so that where people can enjoy what they've sort of invested and put their money into, and rather than just being the games are over now. And I know we saw it a little bit in Sydney where some of the areas turn into ghost towns, and they're just sitting there, and then they're trying to shoehorn things in there to use it rather than just having a natural progression of what the locations, facilities, infrastructure is used for.
Yeah, right. Now, to go off on a bit of a tangent, you started your rugby career late, or what in a professional capacity would be seen very late. Yeah, what gave you, I suppose, the motivation? From going a shot putter at, I think you told me once, at 165 kilograms shot putter, to go, right, well, I'm going to have a crack at rugby, and you start in the lower grades of rugby, and before you know it, within a year or two, you're playing for the Reds, which is phenomenal. And then what sort of motivated you to go, right, well, I'm going to go to Ireland and chase my dream over there?
Yeah. Well, I was 145 kilos. I wish 160.
20 out of 20 there.
I'll take that.
I was about to say, we're doing big boy.
Weight's always a good thing in shot put. The more weight, the better. Look, it was a number of factors. I think athletics was my sport growing up. And even though nobody wants to be a shot putter. It's a bit like front row. Nobody wants to play in the front row, but sometimes you just end up there due to your skills, attributes, inability to do anything else. But the Australian University Games I missed out on World Students, and I had been shot putting for a while now. And it felt like a plateau. It was probably a bit stale. I probably didn't have overly good training habits, sleep habits, all that sort of thing. And was probably, I wouldn't say I was a bit lost, but was just sort of ticking boxes a bit. So I'd also recently had a few dizzy spells, obviously at 145 kilos. You're doing lots of weights, you're lifting heavy weights and things, and I'd had a few dizzy spells in the gym. So had been to the doctor, and the doctor said, you got really high blood pressure, probably wouldn't hurt you to do something a little bit more active, maybe a bit more social as well, because it was just shot put, athletics training. So adding all that together, and I think a lot of the time is just, you hear those stories about right place, right time with guys like Bill Gates, where he grew up in an area and had access to a computer and things like that. It's probably a similar thing with me, that I was at UQ with shot put. You train outside the tartan track at UQ. The rugby guys train inside the tartan track at UQ. So when we'd be there throwing, the guys would be training and having great crack in the middle of the pitch. And it was just at that stage where I've always sort of been open to give something a try. Played a bit of rugby league in high school, but not a lot. So just went down for a bit of a run to have a bit of fun, really. And it just took off. I've always been that sort of person where if I want to do something, I'm going to do it all in. So I think maybe a lot of guys play 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, just socially. They don't care. They're not that fussed about results, and they just want to be with their mates and have a drink and play. Whereas I was probably a bit more serious about it all. So I think the progression through the grades came pretty quickly. Then spent a good bit of time in 2nd grade and had guys at Duncan Hall, ex-Wallaby, really trying to help. And then the opportunity came up through injury just to get in there with the Premier Grade team for the last few games of the season. So that first season was a real rush. Then after that, I think because you're in a Premier Grade grand final, you're on display. That's the goal, I guess, for any club rugby player in Brisbane. People see you. People obviously decided it was maybe worth taking a punt. Had a couple of games at Queensland A, and then went over to New Zealand to actually play with Manawatu for a little bit to actually see whether you could match it with some of the big boys, and came back, and then was back sort of getting settled in. And then Alec Evans gave me a ring, must have got my phone number actually, which was quite surprising. And even to the point at that stage where I didn't quite know, I knew who Alec was, but I didn't fully understand how fantastic a person he was and how experienced he was with rugby. So knowing who he is now, it was quite surprising that he just gave me a call and said, come down and train with the Reds. And that was pretty much it. He used a few terms that I probably won't use on the podcast, but pretty much said, I heard you're big, I heard you're strong, come down and have a run with the Reds. And that was the start of the 2006 Super Rugby season. So the next step then, like I said, it's a complicated story, but if you play 4 or more games for a Super Rugby team, the player agreement is you have to have a full-time contract then. Right. In other words, mainly from the players' union perspective is they don't want to be using and abusing players and playing them and not paying them. That's sort of where it came from. But they already had a full squad, so they were very honest. Jeff Miller was the head coach at the time, was very honest and just said, listen, we've got a full squad, we've got full contracts, we haven't got any contracts left. But if you hang around, next season there'll be a contract for you, and that's when Eddie Jones was meant to be coming in. Right. So Eddie Jones had given me a call once again out of the blue. Quite, shocking to hear from somebody his stature, giving you a call back in the day. Realistically, I had to play though, because I started late. I wanted to give it a crack now and had to play. I was studying full time. I was working full time, trying to train full time with the Reds. Something had to give, so I had an Irish and British passport, actually. My mum's Irish. She was born over there and prides herself, probably when we were growing up, with Irish cooking at least. They're very bland meat and two veg. But the opportunity came up overseas. An agent sort of said, look, there's an opportunity in Ireland if you want to go to Belfast. And 2 weeks later was on a plane.
Yeah, unbelievable.
So it's a bit of a roller coaster, even trying to remember all the steps, actually. But it all very, very thick and fast. That was all 15-month period. So.
Very forwards-orientated game over there as well, which is ideal.
I think, look, for my skill set and obviously inability to know how to play rugby up until then, moving over to the UK was the best thing that ever happened to me. I mean, scrums, mauls, just hitting rucks and playing very attritional sort of forward-based, possession-based game. I don't know if I would have been able to hack it as much in Australia where they play a lot more wide, free, open rugby. But, I guess everything fell into place and it worked out. So
yeah, awesome. And mate, you talk about Alex Evans and you talk about some of those coaches that you've been under and yourself obviously coaching now as well. What's some of the major takeouts from, being under great leadership?
They know their stuff. First and foremost, I think they know their stuff. They know what they're good at and what they're not good at. So all the best coaches I had, the giveaway, I think, is they bring in really talented coaches around them. They're not trying to just rule the roost from the top and have yes men underneath them. They don't have an ego in that space and they want the team to do well. So they bring in really good people around them and they're just comfortable in being themselves. Yeah. I think, I've had sort of during my career, I always thought maybe I struggled and didn't have a lot of great coaches. And then towards the end, but I mean, Les Kiss coached me with Ireland, Joe Schmidt coached me with Ireland, some really world-class coaches there. And you sort of see, even though they're similar in certain aspects, they're very different personalities and people, but I think they don't have that ego around bringing in strong opinions and influences around them. They're happy to have people around them that might be devil's advocate to go, actually, I don't agree with you, and they can take criticism around what their approach, strategy, game plan, things like that are. So
very similar to business, isn't it? Like bring the best people, get the best people around you as much as possible, and then if you've got A players in all your areas and A players, and generally attract A players and B players attract C players and the like. Yeah. So that percentage as well where, you look at your team, if there's a team of 15 players, one person that's not at the standard makes a big impact, and it's the same in business. If you've got 100 people, every person's 1% of your business, aren't they? So they're making that influence.
And like encouraging players to have a say. But I mean, it always comes back to the whole All Blacks sort of concept around no dickheads as well. Like, you can have one guy out of 100, like you said, but if they're not on board and they're not, whether it's rowing the same way or whatever analogy you want to use, they can really affect the significant benefits and the overall output of the team. So it's just making sure you have good people first and the rest tends to fall into place.
And staying on that people and coaching sort of theme, mate, where have you found it, I suppose, frustrating and really being tested, your patience in a coaching role or being coached by someone, and how do you handle that?
I get tested quite a bit, I think, with regards to around other coaches. I think my approach as a player was to listen to everybody. You take on everything and then you can then discern what feedback, what coaching advice you will use and what will benefit you. And I think when I'm dealing with players sometimes where they're not actually listening to what you have to say, they've already made their decision around what they want to do and what's right and wrong is one thing. But I think from a coaching perspective, because I listen a lot as a coach, sometimes, and this, I guess, is a situation when you have a lot of other talented coaches around you where they then feel like because you're listening so much, you either don't know what you're doing or you're not confident in your decisions or what you want. But similarly with coaching perspectives, I like to listen to what everybody has to say and actually take on feedback. I mean, at the moment, we're very, very lucky at Brisbane Grammar. You've got guys like Matt Cobain. I mean, Ricky Durmigan is a central tenet of the program there. You've then got other class players like Bryce Haggerty and Ed Quirk, where Teddy Teller's also there as well. You know, I mean, you've got all these talented players with all different perspectives. So you have to learn how to not block out the white noise, but take on everything, because you're never going to agree. There's a lot of strong personalities and a lot of really strong characters as well that are used to being the alpha male in the room a lot of the time. So how do you work when you've got 15 alpha males in a team? You have to be able to listen and work out what is the right approach, not necessarily the right and wrong in every situation, but what is right for this game or this, season or however we want to approach it.
And that call up to the British Lions, which is a huge opportunity for yourself. How did you make sure that there's a couple of injuries and you got called into the team? How did you make sure that you're always ready to go in those kind of situations, or has that changed over your career? Or
no, look, I think it's a tricky thing because some players can be very almost habitual in how they prepare for games and they have to have all the right kit and everything like that. Whereas I was never fixated on my stuff or my routine. It was just, you try and get yourself in the right headspace. And it was almost where you feel like you have to have a ritual or a routine because otherwise you just look haphazard and unorganised. You worry then that the coach sees you and you do something different every week and then they'll be thinking he doesn't care. So it's almost that where you're trying to play a role. But I think being switched on and ready to go, I think you get so used to change. Different players every week, injuries every week, different opposition every week. Some of the times you'll have a different coach from one week to the next, depending on what the organisation does. You have to be malleable and adaptable and be able to roll with that change. I think I always sort of joke with my kids as well around that sort of the scene from is the Avengers where the Hulk, they sort of say, what's your secret? And you say, oh, I'm always angry. Is I think with regards to rugby as well, you always have to be switched on and always prepared. You always have to be ready that with that instance, I mean, it would be the same in industry and a job aspect. Like you'll have a manager or a boss or somebody that goes, hey, actually, I need you to do this for me. And that might be the one thing that you go, yep, no problems. And you get on top of. That might be the thing that totally changes the trajectory of your career. So I think with rugby as well, my approach with everything was like, I've got to be on the pitch. I don't care whether I play loose head, tight head, winger, fullback, whatever. You got to be in that 15. And I mean, that came up my third season. Matt Williams was a coach at Ulster and they just signed BJ Bota, who's a World Cup winning tight head with the South Africa. So Matt Williams had said, listen, he's going to be our starting tight head. And rightly so. I had been playing tight head, so you then go, okay, I'll play loose head. Yep. And then you have to learn how to play loose head, and it's one of those things where you bite off more than you can chew, and you just gradually catch up. And I think you have to be adaptable. If you can see that sort of goal or trajectory of where you want to head to, sometimes it's not going to be exactly how you planned it, but sometimes you just got to sort of make the most of whatever you've got.
Mate, you've moved from high performance sport into multi-stakeholder partnerships in your current role with regard to infrastructure and the like. What's stayed the same when it comes to sort of leading in that space?
This is probably going to be really cliche considering who I'm talking to, but it's about the people. Yep. If you focus on the people and who you're working with and who you're dealing with all the time, and actually listen and understand and get to know them. I mean, from a stakeholder perspective, so we deal a lot with industry and government. It's at that point where you're like, what do you need? How can we help you? What are your concerns? What are your priorities? And then work out, because obviously I know what UQ can offer. I know what value UQ as an organisation can add. but I need to know what the ask is, what's the problem or what's the gap. Otherwise, it's pointless, and you're just trying to force or impose your views on somebody else. And I think it was the same in rugby, in that you get to know the team and the people. What are their motivations? You know, you're in a team with 15 guys on the pitch, and the biggest squads are 30 or 40 people. You're never going to get on with everybody. You know, there's always going to be a few people you don't really get along with, but you have to get along with because you're working with them and you're playing with them. And you'll have your favourites and the players that you're really close friends with, and then you'll have the majority of the team that you just get on with. But if you actually understand, and I mean, that's a player, but even as a coach, what's a player's motivation? What's driving them? You know, what are they trying to achieve out of rugby? You take that approach as well to work, and it tends to simplify things a lot rather than overcomplicating it and trying to get too far into the weeds with actual content. Like, I'm not a discipline expert at the university, because you have people that have been researching specific niche topics for 20, 30, 40 years. You know, they're the discipline experts. I would be seen as a go-to person because I know enough that I can direct you to the expert, but at least I need to understand what people need.
And from that side, leadership blind spots. What's a blind spot that you've come across in your own style, and then gone, well, how do I fix that leadership blind spot?
The biggest leadership blind spot is doing too much, and not just from a micromanagement point of view. It's just you need to know what your role is, and sometimes it needs to be just leave things alone. And I think as you work your way up as well, you get used to. I mean, you always compare it like, a good bus driver doesn't make a good manager of bus drivers, you know? Yeah. So it's one of those things where you need to know what your role is and not try and micromanage, and not try and over-manage situations or roles, and let people be themselves in their role and grow their own confidence and identity in the role. But it's easy to fall into that space of trying to do too much, trying to help too much, and even be too sort of almost empathetic or compassionate. And sometimes you just have to make sure that you get the right people in the role, and then leave them to it.
Make sure you focus and keep those blinkers on, so you're running in the right direction. You've gone from high performance teams in sports to other roles along the journey, and the coaching, sharpening your understanding of good leadership. What's it look like in sport versus now, that sort of that coaching, and how's that changed over the years from when you were playing at UQ to the Reds to to Ulster to Ireland to the Lions? How has that coaching style sort of changed as it's gone over the last sort of couple of decades, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, because the rules of rugby keep changing, you keep having to change coaching styles, and I think it's moved away from that whole bravado, just trying to bash your head into a brick wall approach. I mean, saying that, there's been some extremely skillful players over the whole century, you know, and before with regards to rugby. But I think coaching now with sports science improving a lot more, that training for 3 hours at a stint has sort of gone out the window, and they really try and focus on periodization and, you know, gradual build-ups and load management, and there's sort of all the GPS tech coming into it as well. And then players, I think, are a lot more tuned into that, so therefore coaches can focus more on not just where's the bang for our buck, but also that sort of skill habituation as well. So rather than just, you know, warm-ups where people are playing sort of walking touch or anything like that, it's, you know, actual having skill sets and specific drills that we can focus on that are going to make you better as a player. I mean, perfect example is the way you see players now, wingers especially, scoring tries over the corner post. You would never have seen that, you know, 20 years ago even, where people were still diving with the two hands out. Whereas now, some of the acrobatics you see with guys literally jumping and diving over the corner post, and they're scoring while their body's in midair, totally over the sideline. Things like that has come about from actual training players to, I guess, look for those situations where they're sort of undefendable, really, you know, and those opportunities are really trying to capitalise on the little 1%ers where the situations do come up, so how can we make the most of it, and then training for it. So
yeah, it's quite amazing. You go down and watch a training set, and you've got mattresses, jumping mattresses set up in the corner where you've got people sprinting and then just launching themselves through the air onto jumping matches while placing the football. Like you just wouldn't have seen that.
It's amazing.
You wouldn't have seen that 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
I mean, the props would always love to have a crack at stuff like that, but we're not allowed to anywhere near those sort of drills. But I mean, they have, tackle bags that people can carry on their backs because guys are jumping for high balls, you know. And then, I mean, I even remember talking to Tommy Bowe one year, and he sort of said, like, he wishes somebody would have told him when he was younger to work on his inside foot chip kick 5 minutes, before every training session, because now you see wingers, it's so common for them taking the outside and then they chip inside to either themselves or somebody else. And you just see it in games because it's effective as well, and it's very hard to defend against. But it's one of those things where back in the day, people would just try and take people on the outside, and if they got tackled out, they got tackled out. Yeah. Whereas now, they're starting to make the most of those opportunities where they can take the outside and still kick back inside. And
and I think the technology and the data that you can get on players now versus back years ago is unbelievable. And then you look at it from a business sense, like the metrics that you can measure on people's performance and their KPIs and their accountability and the likes of that has a similar impact over the last couple of decades, how that's changed. Now I'm going to hit you, Tom, with 5 quick questions.
Yep.
You just answer them as you feel free, just whatever comes to mind, mate. So, worst buzzword in business right now?
Sustainability.
Good one. You go to when you're completely fried at the end of the day?
Most people, when they see me at UQ, they'll see me hiding in a booth at the back of Merlot with a piece of cake and a strong flat white with my headphones in.
Perfect. One thing you're terrible at that your team secretly save you from?
It sounds bad, but organisation to a degree. Yep. In that I need other people to keep me on track at times. I need a diary. I need really good timekeeping, and I've gotten better at it with rugby. But organisation generally is my weak point.
Yeah, no. If it's not in my calendar, then it's not going to happen. I'm similar, mate. Yeah. Your best golden nugget every leader should know.
I think I probably mentioned it before. Listen to everybody. Listen to everybody, and then use what's useful to you.
Yeah, no, it's a great one. The best thing you've ever read or watched lately that actually taught you something?
To be honest, in general, I'm always a big fan of Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
It's probably not lately, so it probably doesn't fit the category, but he's very good at finding sort of hacks and stuff. But I think, was it Bill Gates or somebody, might have been Steve Jobs, where you said you always get a lazy person to find a way because they'll find the shortest, most efficient way to do something. Yeah. That's pretty much my approach to life, I guess. So. Yeah,
perfect, mate. Well, thanks for surviving the final 5, but more so, thanks for joining us on the couch. And you've had a phenomenal career, both off the paddock and now in the business world. So really appreciate you taking the time to join us, mate.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, mate.